This is the Mindset Athlete podcast, and I'm your host, James Roberts. And on today's show, I've got Dr. Shaun Anderson. Shaun is an internationally recognized scholar, proud HBCU graduate, and award-winning professor at Loyola Marymount University. As a sought-after expert regarding sport and social issues, he has worked with recognized organizations such as the MLB, PBS, ADL, Nike, ESPN, and lectured at several universities. As a scholar, he has examined how sport has influenced business, politics, and society. He's also the founder of CRS Global Consulting, which assists organizations in developing and implementing their social responsibilities initiatives. His forthcoming book, The Black Athlete Revolt, the sport justice movement in the age of the hashtag Black Lives Matter, examines the revitalization of athlete activism since the BLM movement began. So, Shaun, welcome onto the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. So the first question I'd like to touch upon is your stance on, obviously, most people would have heard of this story, or I don't know where they were if they haven't, of the controversy around LeBron James and an ESPN interview where obviously LeBron discussed the ineptitude of Trump's administration, and obviously, well, most people have known of Trump's comments on Twitter to be quite inflammatory, and it's almost like there's no filter. Mm-hmm. What was your take on the political establishment coming back at obviously LeBron and probably many other athletes that took this, I wouldn't say an activism stance, but almost the likes of yesteryear of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and all those athletes? Obviously, the list is a lot, but I can't remember all of them, so I do apologize to them themselves. What was your take on, obviously, a politician saying for an athlete to stay within their means and obviously stay in their lane?
So that's a great question. So if we think about a politician telling an athlete to stay in the lane, when we've seen athletes and politics mix for almost a century, is in many ways sort of degrading of their intelligence, right? You have athletes who have spoken diligently, LeBron and others like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Muhammad Ali. We have Althea Gibson, during the civil rights era, speaking out from everything to inequality to socioeconomic status, jobs, all of these things. It's degrading of their character, their intelligence, their abilities to gain an understanding of the current political climate and offer an opinion. LeBron and others have a massive platform provided by what we see with social media nowadays, Twitter, Instagram, and others. We are seeing every story that they involve themselves in coming out on those outlets, probably even more so than we see with traditional news. And so for politicians who are not always right themselves to, put down any athlete who is trying to fight for a cause, again, it's degrading of their intelligence.
Why do you think LeBron took a stance in terms of, okay, I have my own opinion, and probably you do as well, in terms of should obviously he's obviously since this is transpired, has had his account reactivated by Elon Musk due to well, you can't even call it consensus, but in terms of a poll and obviously the majority rules, I was a little bit surprised as it would be that close into like 51% to 49. I thought it would be a little bit more skewed in one way or the other. But why do you think LeBron took a stance to make public what yesterday obviously would be behind closed doors of your opinion um of another individual, let alone obviously the president?
I think we look at LeBron. I don't think it's a secret that, of course, he's at the twilight of his career while he's still a high performing athlete. Um, Very much wants to compete as long as he can. He's building a legacy. So who am I trying to be known as? Okay. Um, the debate about him and Michael Jordan has been going on for years, right? About who is the best. Um, and obviously, you cannot take away from what LeBron has done, whether he's played in Cleveland, Miami, the Lakers, back to Cleveland, whatever you want to call it. But he's also looking at that other end of the spectrum, right? So I'm LeBron, the basketball player. I'm LeBron, the businessman. But I also have to be concerned about societal issues as well, because let's just be honest. He can't be labeled what Michael Jordan was labeled years ago when he was called apolitical because he wanted to sell his shoes. And so I would have to say that LeBron saw this in a strategic manner, you know, to talk about these issues, because not only does he have a concern, I mean, he's built a school in his hometown. He's wanting to see a lot of good things happen, but it's also a legacy builder as well, as to say that, I not only see myself as a person that's building a business for myself, my family, but I'm also having these concerns for society. I have to take advantage of this platform and speak out on what I believe are issues that are going on. So yes, it's great and it's noble, but there is some strategy behind it as well.
Why have you seen a dramatic rise? And obviously your book is obviously a revolt, but in terms of athletes pulling back some of their control, because see, I'm of a generation that was told that yeah, I'm only like, well, I'm late 30s now, but I'm mid-ish 30s. But in terms of, for my generation, for the majority, social media is a little bit awkward because we were traditionally told of what you want in public is public and what is private stays private. So it's
Right.
almost like this. Obviously, for the current generation, it's a little bit easier because obviously they bear all and for the majority, obviously, most social media platforms, it only shows like the highlights of things, whereas people
Sure.
I think have woken up to that as like, well, that's not reality, because there's no person on this earth that is absolute perfection and everything goes right 100% of the time. Otherwise, there'd be a robot.
Mm-hmm.
But my point is, Shaun, for the athletes that you've obviously studied over the years, what do you think has changed where they don't want to take this impartial political stance and kind of be poke their head into the sand?
Yeah. So, we take that back even to around 2007, 2008, when the United States was just going through its one of its major crises, the economic crisis, the subprime mortgage situation, to where people were losing jobs, losing homes, marriages were being broken up because of all of the stuff that was going on. And you saw this initial movement called Occupy Wall Street, where people were saying that, no, enough is enough. Big banks, big businesses have taken advantage of us for years. We're fighting back. Here's what's happening. And so then we began to see the shift in our political spectrum. When Obama was elected, the first, Black president, that kind of garnered people into wanting to talk about, social issues about race, and all of those things. And then we get to the Trayvon Martin trial, where George Zimmerman was acquitted. And then subsequently, you began to see the hashtag Black Lives Matter coming to play, in which incidentally, next year we're coming up on the 10-year anniversary of when that hashtag was first put on Twitter. And so over that time, you began to see a society that was willing to push back against those social norms, push back against, you know, the government, who many people probably felt that was not really trying to help them, not really trying to help them find jobs, not helping them be secure in their education, growth and all of those things. And so I believe that athletes kind of piggyback off of all of these movements that kind of happened prior to that. So, for example, if we take the ESPY Awards, when LeBron James, I believe Dwayne Wade, Carmelo Anthony, Chris Paul, all took that platform to talk about social injustice in the wake of the Trayvon Martin situation that happened. And so from there, little by little, each year, you began to see more and more athletes demonstrate. In 2014, I believe, after the Michael Brown shooting in Ferguson, Missouri, you start seeing the then St. Louis Rams come up with the, hands up, don't shoot protest, and that just started to grow this whole revitalization of athlete activism even more. And so, from what I can see, and from what I've been able to study over the time frame, is that these social movements, Me Too as well, sort of began or they served as the catalyst to what we kind of see today, with athletes now not only engaging in protests, but trying to push for conversations on policy reform and on various social topics.
Well, it's still very difficult, isn't it? Because the
Yes,
politicians are well known for dragging their heels on anything.
absolutely. We have I think athletes were very influential in trying to push, like the Sandra Bland Act, the George Floyd Act. But if you go to the website on where the progress of these acts are, like you say, they're still in a stalemate. So yeah, there is some progression. At least there's been something that's been ushered forth for Congress to pass. But we still have a long journey ahead if we're going to see true change, because again, any type of form of change that brings about any conversations on diversity and inclusion, to equal rights in the workplace, to any sort of nature of that, it seems like it's always going to be the feet dragging.
Well, the challenges with that, Shaun, is obviously it's blurring. If we bring into this the biodiversity of people, of having not necessarily different genders. We know what I'm talking about in terms of people wanting to be binary and things like that is obviously from I'm not going to knock their beliefs, because obviously that's what they believe in, but in terms of genetically, you and I know, and people listening, obviously, if you agree with what I'm going to say, genetically you can only be a man or a woman. So that brings a lot of divisiveness as well, because obviously some people are going to be in one camp and some people are going to be in the others, and it probably makes the politicians' jobs a lot easier, because okay, we need to bolt this on so I can make that needs to be up for debate, so I can obviously make this thing be more drawn out process than it probably needs to be, when it's I think most people could agree in terms of like social and economical things. It doesn't matter what color you are. If you happen to be on the wrong side of the tracks in terms of a town, you mentioned obviously you're going to get a poorer education than maybe somebody else on the richer side of town. As a result, you're not going to be as well versed or well immersed to opportunities in the future, and obviously that can create a victimhood mentality because, oh, I don't have this, that, and the other. So there's almost like a blame culture created, basically because of underfunding when it comes to. And I'm lucky that I actually spoke to a former teacher of mine, because he brought it up. He's moved from Arizona to the East Coast as a result, but where he was teaching was in STEM, and basically because of where he was teaching, the richer schools had to give them equipment and things like that. So you're almost at the whim of somebody else's, well, generosity, because they don't have to do that for them to get. I would call my schooling very fortunate, and I went to a Department of Defense school over here in Europe. So
Okay.
mine was one of the best in the whole system. So what
Mhm.
I had access to is probably a far cry from what maybe other people would have, because they're on the wrong side of town, and because of no fault of their own, they're already getting a substandard existence. And also obviously it could create, if you're not cautious or aware, as almost like blame culture of, oh, I'm not being able to succeed in life because I've not had this, that, or the other.
Yeah, it's interesting. We take into account. So let's say, for example, if you're in a city, let's say where I'm in Los Angeles, right? Um, Prior to SoFi Stadium being built in the community, the citizens of Inglewood, who are predominantly Hispanic and Black, um, now I don't know if they teamed together, but I do know that a lot of citizens were protesting uh, for that stadium to not be built in the city of Inglewood because, okay, yes, every time a stadium comes in, um, gentrification happens, right? People who live in certain communities for a while have to leave because they can no longer afford to stay. I remember renting a condo in that neighborhood myself. I mean, a small 1,000 square foot condo, um, 2 bedroom, no AC, was almost going for about $2,600 a month. And when I moved out to save to purchase a home myself, the owner sold the home for about $400,000 more than what it was worth because of the stadium coming into the community. And so the challenge is, let's say again, when the then St. Louis Rams said, okay, we want to make it final that we want to come to Los Angeles, you know, most of these sport teams make these promises that, hey, we're going to invest so much money into the educational system. We're going to invest so much money into jobs. We're going to invest so much money um, into the infrastructure of the city to where we can work together to build the city up. And typically, or at least the people in Inglewood were like, I don't know, because you left St. Louis a very big bill to pay for a stadium that you're no longer occupying. And so the people are going to get taxed more because you decided to leave. And so then the San Diego Chargers came into Inglewood as well. So now you have two professional teams occupying a space where the people are worried about their local stores being closed down, things being built up. And on the one end, you love to see it because the city is being built up. And but on the other end, again, you're losing out on yet another situation. You're probably having to move further east outside of Los Angeles County because you can no longer afford it. And the politics of affording to live in California, that's another story for another day. But here we are. And so not only do you have that, but the Los Angeles Clippers are now building a new arena in Inglewood also, which will further increase the amount that it costs to live there, to where you could have probably purchased a home, let's say for a Los Angeles number, $300,000 for a condo is inexpensive. But now, by 2025, when that new stadium is finished, it's going to be 800,000 or $1 million for a condo. And so, it's good that the community is being built up, but then you kind of understand where the people in those communities have issue. Like how can we survive? How can we go to our local church services, our local grocery stores when they're being shut down for a Walmart or some other a Whole Foods or again, not to say that those stores are bad, but we understand that those places can become expensive over time. And so the issue then becomes a socioeconomic problem. If I have to move further away to have a place to live, but the access to healthy foods or whatever the case may be is on that side that I left, there's the problem. And so that's one of the things that, especially if you're talking about living situations and not being in the best areas, that's certainly a thing that I think, most local governments need to reconsider. And also, this is where sports come into play, to where, we scream, leave politics out of sports, but that is a big issue. And that's not, it's about ethnicity in some cases, but you're also talking about, again, people having a solid culture being stripped away. So those are many of the big problems that we still have to address.
I want to add to that, Shaun, and I can't remember where I heard this, where they used the example of, obviously you got Beverly Hills on one hand and East
Yes.
LA within, I think, what was it? I might have to ask you that. Within, say, 5 to 10 miles, that's horrific. When you
Yes.
think of most people know of Beverly Hills, be it because of movies or because of film stars, but you're thinking on the one hand of, well, I know Compton because of music, but
Yeah.
the other extreme of poverty down the other end, and it's within driving distance. You're thinking that is horrific to know that of a state that I would think that's quite free thinking and quite out there in terms of more of like surfer culture, that are quite open to change, to challenge things, that they would be okay with that disparity in socioeconomical factors, and that is probably like the extremes of both ends. That when I thought about it, you're thinking that's unacceptable because that's in one city.
Yeah, it's interesting because I always tell people that Los Angeles is great to tour. You can come here and see all the things that you've seen on television, but to live in Los Angeles is a totally different story. So again, the city is trying to build itself up. It's trying to prepare for the Olympics in 2028, the World Cup in 2026, and you have other major events, WrestleMania 2023, I believe, college bowl games, trying to host the Super Bowl again. So all of these things are coming up in a 6-year span. And so what the city is trying to do, and all of the other surrounding cities in Los Angeles County are trying to do, is they're trying to build this infrastructure. They're trying to say, okay, we know that we are a mess. We know that we have a homelessness issue that is astronomical. Okay, you take a drive early into work one morning on Tuesday, and if you just so happen to go through downtown, off the freeway, you'll see a row of tents just lined up all the way up until you get to the stoplight to go to your next destination. And so the city is trying to say, okay, we want to host the Olympics. but we have to do something about this. What can we do? Okay, we need to build these stadiums. We need to build the cities where the villages are going to be. We need to reduce traffic. We need to do all this stuff. And I'm like, well, in 6 years, I don't know. I mean, you can't make that promise, but hey, you know, who's telling you what to do? And so you're quickly seeing some cities being built up and others are not. And so that's why you see that disparity, like you talked about, where Bel Air, Beverly Hills, Brentwood, the surrounding cities of UCLA looking prominent. Okay, but right, like you say, right down the 405 or right down the street, you know, dilapidated buildings, homes, land that are just there. And I always say that if you're trying to build a community, whether it's by bringing in sport teams or not, it's going to take at least 20 years from the beginnings of those plans to see the fruition of that work. And then with Los Angeles, which makes it interesting, there are 11 professional sports teams, and all of the teams have come together under this thing called the Play Equity Fund, which is under the leadership of the LA 84 Foundation, to try to eradicate a lot of the social problems that we see in our society, from youth not getting the proper education, nutrition, all of these things. And again, all of this sounds great, but this is where, again, we get to this point to where if sport, whether it's the individual players, the organizations, are trying to make a difference, then we really have to see what we're putting out there instead of throwing things on the wall and hoping that it sticks, right? Because each day that these decisions are made, a lot of people are going to get impacted. You know, I'm afraid for the homeless community that's here, that once we get closer to the Olympics, they're going to get pushed further east, as we say, to the other counties, to where, you know, it becomes their problem. Whereas it's not resolved, it's just a band-aid, you know. Taking it to the Olympics. Again, we take it back to the Rio de Janeiro Olympics in 2016, where they built this whole infrastructure. And then after a couple of weeks, all the buildings were broken down. It was flooded. You know, the homelessness population increased, crime increased. And then you even got to the point to where people who worked for the city were not even getting paid because they were so bankrupt. All right. And so again, this is why I say people need to understand and recognize the power of sport, whether it's something that's building the community or tearing it down, because it has an impact on what we see. And so when the Olympics drop in 2028 in Los Angeles, we'll see what that does for this community, because so many people are still trying to come here, so many people are leaving, but that remains to be seen how successful beyond the monetary value the Olympics are.
Well, the only people that I can think to mind, Shaun, that are leaving are the ones that are wealthy.
Yes.
So be it, if it's mostly the ones that I've heard about a movie star, so I'm not going to call out one in particular because that's not fair to that individual. Because they're moving out because the taxation on their property is just astronomical. So you can't blame the person as an individual to, in this case, I think they moved from California to Texas because it was a little bit more reasonable to own a property there. Because if that was you in that circumstance, you probably would do the same thing. Because why would I give X amount of percentage to a state government when I can move somewhere else and I have the means to do it, and obviously pay less? So that doesn't matter if it's in the US. That could be, from a business perspective, that's the Middle East gets a big kudos as well. Why don't you move to Dubai? But what people don't showcase with that is, yes, it might be more beneficial from a tax perspective, but it costs a lot more to live out there. So I think some people are easy to be able to showcase the the pros, but they don't always give you the cons in that aspect. So when you mention the Olympics, obviously the Coliseum's obviously going to get a facelift. That's for one.
Oh yes, definitely.
So the University of Southern California will benefit as a result of that. And I think what you mentioned with the homelessness of, and I competed at one of these games, China, Beijing, and they pretty much bulldozed communities to put up village, the athletic village, the Olympic village.
Yeah.
Obviously, and I can give people some of this because obviously we're allowed to talk about things like this now, but it was in my athletic contract. You could not talk about anything political. So Tibet, no chance. So if the media brought it up, no comment. Whereas I think in the last, I think it's the last Olympiad or so, I think that there's been probably a little bit of outcry from the Olympic athletes say, if I want to talk on something, I should be allowed to do it, and I should be allowed to do it at the games because that's the biggest platform to do it. And to my surprise, it passed. So if it was to do around, well, China's had obviously the Winter Olympics not too long ago, you could have talked about that, and this, well, the Chinese government probably to try to hush you up, but from a Western media, you would be able to kind of go, okay, well, that's not right because that's not right of a country not recognizing Tibet as a free country as the rest of the world does, because they perceive their landmass to be bigger than it is. And same with Taiwan is another one with Chinese Taipei. So I think the good point that you mentioned, Shaun, of the Los Angeles having the Olympics is the Olympics are obviously going to have it in the US or countries that can make a profit, because at the end of the day, they're going to get some of that money as well. So to see that, we call them white elephants, so be it like stadium that's obviously derelict and things like that. I think the only one in Europe is the Greeks, and that's it. And that's pretty much a beacon as well. As long as that doesn't happen, you can have the games. So most of the stadia in this country is still being used. What are we now, 10 years later, after the Olympics in London 2012? Be it they might have lowered the capacity of the stadiums. Some have gone into consortiums as such, and they've taken them over, and the community can. So the velodrome is still being used. What did the Copper Box hold? I think it was handball. There's a basketball franchise that uses that.
Yeah.
Okay, it's London, so it's not that bad, but that because it's in the east of the city, transport links aren't the greatest. So probably if they were a franchise, they'd probably want to play in something that's in central London, but the rent would be astronomical. Okay, teams would probably be able to do it, but we're talking about when I was a kid, and they'd have maybe American money, and we're talking oh gosh, .com boom and things like that. So the early 2000s.
Right, yeah.
So there's probably a lot of money circulating within things then, to the point that sports teams in this country now, from maybe, well, I can't even call basketball a minority sport, but it's not as popular as, say, soccer in this country, that they're playing in probably 5,000 seater arenas. For the US, that's not really, that's probably like second division, third division collegiate.
Yeah. So it's interesting to talk about that because, I have a lot of friends that I talk to about sports, and the big thing that we're seeing now, of course, is the World Cup, and they was like, what's the big deal? And I was like, well, you have to understand that you're living in the U.S. The NFL is popular, sure, but the world sport is soccer, and the world is watching, and this is a very big thing. And so you bring about an interesting point to where we see sort of like how the world is affected by several sports that come in. We talk about the Olympics for sure, but we think about now the NFL and this international series, and they are constantly playing games in the UK, in Mexico. They played the first game in Germany, and I know the NFL was initially speaking about actually putting a franchise in London, and I'm just curious as to how this worked. Not only from the
It's not.
fan base
It's not.
perspective.
It's not from if they were honest to
Yeah,
the audience,
yeah.
I don't see how it's one economically viable for the
Mm-hmm,
team.
mm-hmm.
Players won't want to go to that franchise because you're spending, say, you're gonna have to probably be at least 2 weeks on the road to
Yeah,
make it obviously that it's not a disadvantage to travel. Well, we'll say the West Coast is about probably 10-12 hour flight from
yeah,
London, maybe a
yeah,
little bit less, maybe a little bit more. That's even teams flying from the West Coast to the East Coast and time difference. And I think that we're only talking about 4 hours difference. But I think the Rams did a YouTube about that one when they came over to London, and the amount of logistical things that had to be into pretty much they were doing at the beginning of the season for
yeah.
this one game and 1 week. So if you're saying it one team, yeah, yes, it'd be probably nice, but when are they going to become successful?
Yes,
Because
that's the
there are
big question.
advantage off the back straight away as, hey,
Yeah,
what division are you going to put them in?
yes, absolutely.
That's still a, I'll say, 7 hour flight to New York. So, and then vice versa for obviously the fan base. Maybe some of the I actually have a client that one of their family members is a season ticket holder of the LA Rams, and he
Yeah,
and what she found baffling was he wasn't even allocated a seat for the Super Bowl. But you're thinking, well, why would they give a season ticket a ticket when you can then X times the value of that seat because it's this one-off game so I wasn't surprised. So I think when you say, Shaun, of having the team, yeah, it's nice, but you'd need to have probably another 3 teams in Europe to make it viable. So what we're going from a league of 32 to now uh, a league of 36, and where would you then host? Because obviously NFL Europe was pretty big back in the
yeah,
day. I'm showing
right.
my age now, but obviously that was pretty much an entity, almost like for people that don't know, almost like the G League
Yeah, yeah, right.
of the NBA. So
Mhm.
Kurt Warner is probably one of the success stories at the back of that of won a World Bowl and then won a Super Bowl. But I can't remember how many teams were in it. I think it was like 8 teams.
Mhm.
I think predominantly, I think it was 4 in Germany. We had 2 at one time or another. So London Monarchs and then the Scottish Claymores. Spain had a team. The Amsterdam had a team. And then I can't remember where else. Whereas I think there is a reincarnation of it,
Right.
but it doesn't get the coverage. And it's probably like way under the radar. But you're thinking of, well, for the fan experience, you might maybe travel, I don't know, once in a blue moon. As okay, you might have gone to Berlin, not Berlin, you would have might have gone to Munich because it was the first one. You might have gone to Mexico City because it
Right.
was the first one. Obviously London's had multiple now, but you might go once, but you're going because of the attraction of the city. So you've got the capital to be able to go, oh, okay, I'm going to go see an NFL game, but I'm going to experience the culture and make a vacation of it. So for the fan experience, I don't think it will work. And you think of it more so having a bias in this country, they've got teams that they support already. So it'd be probably every team in the NFL is represented in the in the spectators that are watching a game that's in London. So probably the same with Munich, and probably the same, maybe less to the degree with Mexico City, but would then put obviously Arizona and San Francisco there. It's probably like a Latino aspect of that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because obviously I did interrupt, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether or not you think it's viable and why.
James, that's a great question, and I've questioned it for the longest, because I'm like, okay, if you're going to play in these cities, in these other countries, is your goal to eventually start a franchise in all of these places, or are you just trying to scout? So let's just say that we're just going to play these games to build up a base of supporters, and then hopefully they can call on their governments to say, hey, bring us here to stay. And I don't know. The scheduling conflicts that you were just talking about are, again, astronomical to try to resolve here, and I don't know if it can be done at least anytime soon. I agree in the sense that, yeah, you may need a couple of more franchises in at least a 5 or 6 hour flight frame from each other to even warrant such a move. Now, here's the thing. A couple of colleagues and I did a study a few years ago about whether fans of sporting events, whether their team wins or loses, are you there just to support that team, or are you there for other reasons? And so overwhelmingly, and this is just with one professional NFL team, we of course need to do the study with others, but most of the people there at the games who answered this survey said, I actually prefer the stadium experience more so than watching this game. So whether it's parking to the concession stands, to how I'm able to sit, the cleanliness of the stadium, just the overall ambience, I would appreciate that on any given day that I attend than watching the game itself. And so, I believe that's also one of the reasons as to why we're seeing these new modern stadiums being built all across the world. And so I think the NFL, in that sense, will continue to have a problem. I don't see, at least within the next decade, any type of establishment of a team in another country outside of the US, which I would then turn to say that the NBA is doing a better job with its global approach than probably any other sport out there. I mean, we're seeing the results of that with, more players from Europe playing in the game like never before and becoming superstars, right? The NBA just a couple of years ago established NBA Africa, and they built this program around a social responsibility effort that if we are to recruit and try to build up talent in Africa, we're also going to simultaneously help build up some of the countries that are here, at least from the things that they say that they need. How tangible that is, I don't know. When can those things come to fruition? I have no clue. I still think it'll take at least a decade for all of that stuff to try to pass. But the NBA, I believe, has a larger fan base than the NFL outside of the US. I think the game is easier to play. It's easier for little kids to bounce a basketball and try to shoot it rather than playing tackle in the backyard, because nowadays with the concussion in the NFL, parents don't want the kids involved. And so, it's difficult. It's always a money play for any type of sport franchise to try to establish something outside of their common environment. But the NFL, I believe, is going to struggle for a few years because I don't know. I just don't think the fan base is as strong as they think it is. You know, particularly when it comes to Europe, like you say, you were right on the money. When people are having an opportunity to go to Munich, it's because it's that experience, probably more so than attending the game. The game is just the icing on the cake. And so it's exciting again to see the growth of sports of the NFL outside of this country, but I don't think it's going to happen as fast as they would want it to.
Well, it's I think decisions when you talk about like relocate, or we like broadly talk about relocation, it's generally about money for the owner or the franchise. So, and I'll bring in soccer because it's a good example because Manchester United owned by Americans, so the
Yeah.
Glazers. So Tampa, the Bucks know obviously about the Glazers. Arsenal is owned by Americans, and so is Liverpool. So when they tried to create that European, what do they call it, Super League,
Yeah.
where it was closed shop and it's like a franchise model, the
Mm-hmm.
fans obviously showed it. So you probably have seen it. They went to the streets and no, we're not having this because obviously in our tradition of European sports, there's promotion and relegation. So there's a consequence of losing. So if
Yeah.
you're bad, hey, next year you're going to play in the division below. Okay, I think the NBA has talked about it. I don't think they'll ever do it because how do you do it? I think somebody showed a good example on social media. Is if you demote a bad NBA team, what happens if it's their G League affiliate that goes up? So it doesn't work because people are on 2-way contracts that, hey, 1 minute I'm playing for, just say for example, I'm a New York Knicks fan. So say they were really, really, really bad. You can't tank because obviously the consequences of that is you play in the G League.
Mm-hmm.
People in New York will not have that because they're obviously,
No.
well, I'm not saying the diehards more than anywhere else, but in terms of they probably are the most cynical sports fans going that, oh no,
Yeah.
we don't want our G League to be the NBA team. So in principle, would it spice things up in terms of American sport? By all means, because people wouldn't do that. They wouldn't kind of,
Right.
oh, we're having a bad season, so let's deliberately start losing so we get the best player. Whereas obviously in European sports, the ones that get the best player got the most money. So that's probably what's wrong with European sports. As all you need is we'll look at Manchester City. So say Middle Eastern money, oil money, they've gone from mediocrity in the last say 10, 15 years to they're
Mm-hmm.
pretty much, you could probably say, unless they have a bad season, they could probably win the league every single year. So for an experience of that becomes boring because okay, well, know who's going to win because for everybody else in the league, there's a disparity of finances that there's no hope in. There's obviously there's one team that Leicester won it, but that's like a one probably a million shot that ever happens again. So
Yeah.
the model for the American system of it's dependent, if people were really honest, it's the actual people themselves that are paying for these massive sports teams because they're bidding cities against them. So okay, if you guys don't build us a new stadium, we're gonna leave.
Mm-hmm.
You try and do that in Europe, it's like okay, bye bye,
Yeah.
because the taxpayer wouldn't pay for it. So me being a Manchester United fan, Old Trafford is an iconic stadium worldwide, especially in soccer. It needs a massive. I can't remember what it was. I think it's like $1 billion that needs to be invested in the stadium alone
Mm-hmm.
to make it back up to what you mentioned before of the stadium experience is not good. So
Yeah.
people that are going to games because of its nostalgic history that is created, and it's not it doesn't want very much for in probably the last 5 years, but it's back of its history that people are going from Middle East, from Asia to go and watch games, but the experience is horrendous at best. I've been but to a youth game. game, and I didn't experience the concourse because I didn't need to drink alcohol. So I'm going to take people for their word if they say it's a bad experience because it's too close together and you feel like you're on top of each other, versus say Tottenham Hotspur Stadium that's obviously got an NFL field underneath the soccer state, the soccer. So that one's been purposely built to have NFL thing, but I don't know how much it costs to build it. That obviously the team is still in debt paying that off, but because of the stadium experience and they probably could hold conferences and things like that, it's multi-purpose. Whereas I think what Southern California is trying to do with trying to change the aesthetics of the outside of the Coliseum, but also keeping the history of the building. That's the challenge, I think, between it's almost like a chasm that's created between probably the rest of the world and the US, that unless you understood the tradition that obviously European sports built on, which I don't think the owners do, they're just looking for the next buck, you're always going to fall out with the fans because there's no synergy. And obviously from an American standpoint, that if the owner's not happy with the city, oh, we'll just move it. Doesn't bother us. But okay, I think the only one that I saw is when the Raiders played the Rams, I think last week, where there was more Raiders fans at that game than Rams. So you could still say that city is black and gold, black and silver.
Yeah.
To this day, back off the basis of winning the city's its first Super Bowl in the 80s, which I found was quite hilarious. Because I'm assuming some might even travel down from Oakland to go and watch the game.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's interesting with that thought process because the new Rams, the LA Rams, or they're back, whatever you want to call it, because it's like they left and came back, but still fan base, like you say. It's as if to say that you had true sports fans in the 80s, early 90s who diehard Raiders fans. Everybody with the costumes, and it was an experience in and of itself. And that's where I believe, again, like the true sport fan coming to watch your team existed at that point. There was not an elaborate SoFi Stadium, at that point. Like, well, yeah, when they play, it's iconic, and a lot of the arenas and stadiums here are still iconic. But SoFi Stadium nowadays is it's like the Rams are. It's great when they win, but the people wouldn't care less, outside of that, because, like you say, stadiums now are more built for events, concerts, auto shows, for people even to just pay money for tours, right? I'm not saying that people didn't pay money for tours back in the day when the Raiders were here in Southern California, but nowadays it's an entire entertainment spectacle to where people in Los Angeles were happy to see the Rams win the Super Bowl, but people are like, well, if they win the Super Bowl or not, I'm just going to go to the beach on the weekend. I'm not concerned about entertainment, even though the city is trying to build up LA Live in that area to be a big sports hub. But if you drive to downtown right now, where it's located in the middle of the afternoon, it's barren. There's no one walking around. People are at work, or people who are not working are somewhere else in another city. So the building something out here for nostalgic purposes, at least in the sport perspective, it is, at least in Los Angeles again, is not going to work because people are seeing other instances of value. When the Olympics come, when the World Cup comes, it's going to be grand, and you're going to see it all broadcast across the world. But once it's over here. And again, that's my fear when it comes to building sports and building communities around sport, um, as the world is kind of shifting into seeing sports as another outlet for entertainment instead of people going to see this um, because they are just in love with it. So let's take it back to what you were saying also relative to this past Olympics. You know, I think people were very intrigued by, say, Simone Biles and her Olympics record and all of that. But then when she had to bow out, you know, the big conversation started to go into sports and mental health. And then you had those who were like, well, I don't care about your mental health. You need to play. We are paying all this money to come to these games, or you know, we're spending all of our time watching these games. We're watching to see you, but you decided to step away. Well,
But
she was just really
I think that's what's wrong. I think
right.
for okay, I've been retired from high end sport for almost a decade,
Mm-hmm.
but I think this mindset of what you're talking about, Shaun, is what's wrong, because if you're treating people like machines,
Yeah.
and okay, I'm probably a byproduct of that because that's how I used to think in terms of,
Yeah.
oh, I'm gonna stay under the radar. I'm gonna say as little as possible to not create controversy or cause any problems with myself. Thus, I think most people praise me, oh, you're quite outspoken, because I'm gonna stick to my guns now,
Yeah.
because I'm gonna take anything that comes at me with maybe a pinch of salt, or obviously if I've said something and it's offended somebody, okay, if it's not rude, you maybe need to grow a thicker skin, like you said back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
But from the mental health perspective, you make a good point of, we'll use Antonio Brown as probably a good example of American
Yeah.
sports.
Yeah.
For the person to take off their jersey, throw off their pants, and run across the field when they're in the middle of a game, that's screaming for somebody needs help.
Mm-hmm.
So I think from a mental health perspective of, I think this is probably going to be a stigma for a couple, maybe hopefully for less than a decade.
Yeah.
People are going to be more outspoken and talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
That males in general won't be afraid to kind of go, hey, hang on a second, I'm not okay. I'm not afraid to talk about I need help, because for heaven forbid I might do something that obviously my family will regret, not me, because I will no longer be here. So for people to say that you need to perform, I probably wasn't fair to Simone, if I was honest, and I'm speaking to you today and the people listen, that I probably thought like that as, hey, she's there to perform, or let somebody else take up that stage that may have not got the opportunity because you're in the way. And if you're not able to, for whatever reason, you got the twisties and you can't compete, I don't know what that feels like as a gymnast. It's probably horrific
Yeah.
that you don't know where your landing point is when you're doing a somersault and you don't know if you're going to land on your face or on your feet. That's probably a horrific fear to have, but the powers that be are not going to let that happen, because the other person's got no experience of that event, and they might crumble. So they're not going to make that decision because Simone Biles is the best, but we're not going to aid her to help with mental health, because I'd probably say sports organization as a whole are inept when it comes to that, because they're and this is my only personal experience now, so I'll own it. They'll take the next person of it. If you're not fit for the job, they'll just take the next man up. And
Yeah.
if that's American football, whatever, if you're injured or whatever, they've got your replacements just behind you. So okay, James, you're not 100%. You can't go today. You better hope that person doesn't perform because
Mm-hmm.
you're out of a job. So from a mental health perspective, it's horrific because you're almost creating it,
Yeah.
because it's like, oh, I can't ever step foot over the white line because somebody else is going to take my space. And if they take my space, I might not get back in. And that's my livelihood. That's my family. That's my whole existence. And be it from, and you probably have heard this as a professor as well, a lot of athletes, that's their identity. So they have nothing else because of, we're coming back to that socioeconomic factor again, because they're not as well, I won't say well educated. They don't see putting the same amount of effort into their academics as they do their athletics to be able
Yeah.
to get into to further education. So thus, for whatever reason, it's probably predominantly black athletes. My only way out of the ghetto is through sport, and that's not true, because obviously you're a very successful person in academia. I was successful in sport, but I think I've got to give kudos to obviously my professors. They said you can't box yourself as an athlete. I see you as this, and this.
Yeah.
That has done me enormous favors over the years, especially since I've retired. Yeah, they're right. I'm not just an athlete. I don't even see myself just solely as that anymore.
Yeah.
I've got my academic background because through no fault of my own, it was almost a backdoor entry. And then I wanted to prove that I was worthy of my place. So I'm going to not over excel, but I'm going to excel in the classroom to kind of make a point that I'm smart as well as gifted when it comes to athletics, that I deserve to be here on my brain's merit
Yeah.
alone. And it probably more to prove to myself that I was smart enough to be at that institutional level. And obviously, from a race perspective, disability, so I can almost jump from one box to another as so I see fit, not what society is dictating to me that, oh, you're only this, and this, and that's what I view. So, to my point about what you mentioned, the mental health, people only see the athlete as maybe two-dimensional, as I
Yeah.
only want you to entertain me. Athletes are not jesters. We don't live in the Middle Ages. I'm not here to entertain you. There is a reason why an athlete fell in love with their specific sport, because they loved every aspect of that particular sport. And I think when the athlete loses that, that's probably when they need to retire, because they've lost
Yeah.
sight of what's really important. So I thought I'd share that.
Yeah. You bring up a great point and an example that I had when I was in graduate school and I was teaching a class, and there was a basketball player in my class, and he would just be dragging into class. It was an early morning class, and I know that he would try to stay up, but he kept dozing off. And for me, instead of like, well, some professors are, well, what are you doing? You're disrespecting me, all this stuff. I just talked to him after class for just a few minutes just to say, hey man, I've noticed that it's hard for you to try to stay up. Is everything okay? What's going on? And so it was if he just dropped his shoulders and was able to have somebody to listen to him for the first time, where he lamented about, oh, this week has just been rough. I've had practice all day. I've only gotten 2 hours of sleep because I'm on a schedule. They make my schedule for me to where I spend most of my time practicing. I in classes. I'm in tutoring, and I have late night meetings, and then I have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to practice, and I have to come to your class at 8. So it's like I sometimes I don't know where I'm coming or going, and so that speaks volumes to just keeping it in the college sports perspective, right? Where you have less rights, or at least yeah, less rights than some professional athletes when it comes to the things that you could do. to the assembly line approach that many athletes have to go through. And like you said, if I was afraid that if he didn't get proper rest, something could happen to him medically and physically. But at the same time, he was talking about how I have a brother, I have a mom that I have to, try to support back home. I receive Pell Grant money that I have to send back to them because they sacrificed for me to be able to play this game. And so it's a cycle. So it's not only the burden of being a student athlete, but also being the one that they think is going to become a pro athlete, right? And so a lot of I believe it's important that mental health has become a big topic in sports because we don't talk about it. Again, like you just mentioned about your career, athletes are super intelligent. Athletes are seeing our world and are trying to fight against the things that are putting them down and others that they care about. But again, the stigma is shut up and dribble. The stigma is just play your game and be quiet. But here's the thing. Yeah, you're getting that message from, some politicians in the media, but you're also getting that message from somebody on Twitter who's sitting on their couch watching TV all day, being an armchair politician. So you're just saying the same thing to this athlete that you should be doing. If that's the case, you should just be quiet and sit on your couch if that's going to be the argument. But the issue now becomes, how do we shift from just seeing athletes as entertainers? Because at the end of the day, you have a family to go back to, you have children, you have some time where you just probably want to sit at home and binge a Netflix show. So it's important, and I really wish that it's not frowned upon for athletes to talk about these issues. And this is not even just, again, the teams and your family, but like you're saying, if you're a black athlete, it's all the other vitriol that's coming against you for even saying that racism still exists in our society. You're getting people saying, "I'm going to burn your jersey because you shouldn't be talking about this stuff." And it's really a disservice for the amount of time and effort that you have put out there as an athlete to be the best that you can be and to be there for your fan base, to not be seen as somebody that has a voice that is intelligent. Again, I believe that's degrading to the highest order.
Well, I think what you're saying, Shaun, is I think this is my personal opinion now, so
Mm-hmm.
people might not agree with this, but I think obviously it's easier for people to see athletes as entertainers because it's jovial. Oh, I can spend, say, we'll use the NFL, say 3 hours watching a game, or maybe a little bit less for NBA and other sports, and then I can go back to what I feel comfortable with. So
Sure.
I think it's almost this persona that athletes put out of, some people will think that if athletes feel that they're better than them, it's almost like pre-describing into somebody's head, or they don't like the notion of the competition. So I can't compare myself to. I wouldn't even dream of doing it because you're setting yourself up to LeBron James,
Sure.
because okay, what distinguishes between yourself, me, and him? Color's not a factor. We're all the same. He's very, very good at bouncing a ball. That's putting it very harsh. That maybe
Mm-hmm.
you and I maybe not have that skill set.
Yeah.
And he's getting paid handsomely for doing something that he's good at. Is that right? Probably not. When we look at sports in general as how much people get paid,
Sure.
there's probably not. But then you can blame the media for that. The media needs to be accountable for that, because if it wasn't producing the amount of content that the NBA is on every day. Most sports things are on 24/7. If that wasn't put out there, people would probably be, well, nowadays they're probably not, but as in be quite content to read a sport result in the newspaper once a week.
Yeah.
So that's where some of the gaps become so unsurmountable of the haves and the have-nots, because okay, I don't know how much his contract is, but if it was given to me, I wouldn't turn it down. I don't think you would. I don't think anybody listened down. Oh, if you want to pay me that, okay, that seems about fair.
Yeah.
But for what I've accomplished, it comes down to probably value of how much do you value in yourself. So for people that are feel challenged by that, is they maybe need to look at ourselves and look in the mirror in terms of, well, what is it that you feel that is so intimidating or makes you feel a knot in your stomach, that you don't feel comfortable with the people being outspoken and sharing what is their morals, their ethics in terms of what they want to stand by and want to be.
Yeah.
And this is not verbatim, but obviously Martin Luther King Jr. said, be people be judged on their character and not their skin.
Mm-hmm.
I come from a mixed household. Of my white paternal side of my family brought me up that is how I view people. Doesn't matter if you're white, black, yellow, it doesn't bother me. I'm going to base it on how do you treat me? How do you respect me? What's my gut reaction to you as a person?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter what color you are. But
Mm-hmm.
that's a statement that's 60 years old. That's still an issue in the US. I think it's becoming an issue in the UK in terms of, but I think it's, if you look at it from a sociological, but sociology perspective, it comes back to money, whether or not you have it. So it's not almost, it's being, people being put against each other because of where can we find divide, where can we make people have arguments, where can we put, if it's not race, it's religion. If it's not religion, it's gender. If it's not that, of probably still a problem in the US now. Are you vaccinated? Are you unvaccinated? But that's, if you looked at the root cause of that, that is power dictating. Because I think the best thing a work colleague said, he was a science teacher. I think somebody said, "What's the difference between people's color?" It's like everybody's their genetics. They're all human race, and I think this is taken from I think it's TikTok. A Rastafarian was talking to a white guy in the street in the UK. Of I'm gonna obviously make it a bridge version of this. He said, if you put water into, say, obviously I've got a blue bottle in front of me, a blue bottle, red bottle, white bottle, what do you see? The liquid is still the same on the inside, but I will see a blue liquid, red liquid, and a white liquid. So we are souls in a vessel.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the most important thing I think from that was, what color is the person's mind?
Yeah.
I'm gonna see color. It's whether or not you could use the word woke, as whether or not the person is have the awareness and foresight and the consciousness to question not everything in life, because obviously that would cause there's that amount of stress, but have this awareness to kind of go, well, okay, what's the intent of the government making me not like somebody based on their color of the skin? That's probably a hard question to ask yourself. That's not a debate. I'm probably very fortunate that both sides of my dad and his sister been in the military, so they have gone outside of outside of the US, sorry, and experienced different cultures. That they probably see the world a little bit differently.
Yeah, it's right. So the aim is the I think from many people who don't want to argue, like you say, there's so much the media, there's so much just how certain families was raised according to region, according to country. That just keeping it at the U.S. level, it's a disparity between the South and the West Coast and the North and the East, relative to people's understandings of politics, religion, whatever the case may be. And all of these social movements that have come up, like Black Lives Matter, Me Too, all of these are people essentially um, crying out about an issue that they're facing. But I believe, let's say, for example, let's keep it at the Black Lives Matter movement. When that movement came out, then the subsequent All Lives Matter came out. Um, I'm willing to bet that the people who created the Black Lives Matter movement were not trying to say that, oh, I'm better than you. I want to get things, unfairly. Let me rephrase that. I want to receive things in a way that it's just given to me instead of me working for it. That's not what the people are saying. They're just simply saying that, hey, for example, if I, as a Black person, am in line for a CEO position at a company against a white person, just let both of us go up for this job without the penalty of being Black, you know, without the penalty of having the stereotype on me that I can't work this position, and let me fight for this position fair and square. And if this white person just so happens to maybe interview better than me, or has better credentials in the sense of what you're looking for, then okay, so be it. That person got the position. But don't ostracize me, or don't not give me an opportunity because of the color of my skin, or what you believe that the stereotypes about my people would prevent me from doing a great job. And so at the end of the day, the goal, like you said, with MLK, is to reach this racial harmony where we're not judged by the color of our skin, right? I think when people say, well, I don't see color, well, I think that's a hope. That's a thing to say when you are wanting to be in a world where your content is judged, but we know that's not the case in some perspectives. And so when you're taking into account this movement, again, keeping it the Black Lives Matter movement, um, I think we're going to continuously see things like that so long as we see instances of, say, police brutality, where it's recorded that someone is getting shot by the police. But then on the other side of the argument, there's people saying, well, that person provoked that police officer to shoot them. Well, I mean, there are videos
That's
where
excessive. That's excessive force, though. So that's
right.
that's probably the fifth. The Declaration of Independence needs to be changed slightly
Yeah.
as a document. As you change, I think it's put a comma in a different place, and it changed the whole meaning of the document.
Yeah.
But whether or not this political establishment would ever let that happen is one thing. But the right to bear arms is your problem. That's probably why of say the rest of the world looking in. It's like, well, if you're teaching kids to hide in the corner of a classroom to be able to protect themselves from a gunman that breaks into the school, that's just putting a band-aid over or painting over the cracks. Whereas the problem is maybe and obviously people are obviously do it want this to happen anyway, is maybe having more stringent rules for people to be able to get a gun in the first place. That would obviously bring down the rate of in which people are killed by another human being dramatically. And I think the BBC asked somebody in the White House about this, and they kind of reversed it as, well, you've got a lot of knife crime. It's like, yeah, but I'm not saying that's, me personally, I'm not saying that's right either, but that's almost, in that circumstance, the media that make that more prominent in the mainstream media is like black on black crime. So that doesn't matter if we're in the UK or the US, because that's probably one of the problems with young black individuals in general, probably worldwide, as in, why do you feel the need to hurt another black individual to get, you mentioned the Jordan shoes, because I watched a documentary on that amount of people that killed when those the Jordan Air Jordans came out. I was like, but there's shoes. Why are you killing somebody over a brand new pair of shoes? It's it it baffles me, and it's irrational beyond measure in terms of what. Okay, I can't remember how much, it's like $150 shoes, but you're killing somebody over shoes because of the fear of missing out on other things of that. So we're coming back to the socioeconomic factor again. So it's not right that the police brutality, but I think also, I think as male role models, we need to look at a little bit internally into our own community and kind of going, well, what is it that is systematically broken, that's, and I don't know if this statistic has changed since I was in high school, but I was more likely to go to prison than I was to graduate. That is horrific statistic of, I think, social media to showcase it, because the BBC was bashing Qatar for having the World Cup, and obviously there's a black um reporter on there of Caribbean descent, but they probably will not promote that narrative when it goes to the US, as in terms of 25% of African Americans are incarcerated, because it doesn't fit that narrative of, well, what is the case, and because I think the Middle Eastern have said it was outright racism, because you don't feel that they probably did win it through corruption, but in terms of, they've held a pretty good competition. The amount of crime as a result of alcoholism is way down. That they're thinking of banning alcohol at future competitions, and that's obviously Sharia law. So that's Islam coming into probably something that is positive. That's what I take from it. But in terms of, it's almost like the media's got an agenda in terms of, well, we're going to showcase this to be wrong, this to be right, according to political, like almost political opinion, or what, like people's opinion. Whereas, like, well, I have a right to not agree with you. In terms, that's what debate is. That's what conversation is for. If we maybe come to a conversation, we agree to disagree, that's okay. As in, we've heard each other out. We can't agree on certain points. We may never will do. That's okay. But that's how I've been brought up. So that thing that you mentioned is I think not right, but I think it comes back to maybe some individuals within police forces having maybe too much power. They use the gun as a way in which to belittle an individual depending on their race, as, oh, I've got power, I can go back now not 5 generations, but 5 decades to what was obviously a massive difference between North and South. I won't know that. And my dad's 73 years old. I would assume that he would have faced some segregation, be it growing up and going to school, possibly in the military itself, to the point that, to give credit where it's due, that he's obviously tried to not put a mark on me as, okay, I'm going to treat you pretty much on civil rights movement, as you're going to treat people based on their character. And if you like the person, white, yellow, brown, whatever, I'm liking you because you are at the roots essence of you as a human being, or a kind person. So you just happen to be a different color. That's about it. So me being half American, it's very troubling to hear stuff, be it more from I won't say it's not that impartial, but obviously it's an outsider perspective of the BBC looking at the political landscape in the US. It frightens me because obviously it affects me because my family is obviously over there. Because it's like, well, it's almost a ticking time bomb waiting to go off, which is you thinking from an economic standpoint, it's probably, I won't say the richest, one of the richest countries on the planet. That shouldn't be really happening in a civilized country.
Yeah, it's interesting where we are in the U.S. at this juncture. It's an awakening on one end, where we are seeing people from various ethnic backgrounds in the country saying enough is enough with our issues, whether it's issues of gun laws to, again, everything on the gamut of social responsibility issues in this country. But then is one end saying that, okay, no, we need to keep the things the same. The woke movement has come and destroyed us. We don't need to see any of this stuff changing. We don't need to see diverse characters in movies. We don't need this. We don't need that. And that's the argument that's going on opposite ends of the political spectrum, religious perspective, or what have you. And in the midst of all of that is the slug moving along relative to tangible change. And it's I think when it comes to all of these issues, it's unfortunately going to take time. Now, the reason why I say that is because we can make a lot of drastic changes when it comes to things, but we are afraid of the backlash from any perspective. Like you can hire people from diverse backgrounds who are qualified to be in a workspace, but many companies are saying, well, we can't find those individuals. Where there are a lot of them out there. What are the efforts that you're putting in to make that happen? We can see it and we can do it. But many people, whether it's the media, whether it's sport organizations, are tied to some, partisan situation. Where it talks about like the NFL and many of its owners donating exclusively to the Republican Party. Now, you an NFL owner, I guess you have the ability to do what you want, but what you support can, not benefit some people who don't believe in the things that you believe in. That's neither here nor there. But where we're going in our society will totally be based on if we can get to the point to where, okay, BLM movement, I hear where you're coming from. How can we make this situation of benefit to where you feel as if you're treated as equally as the next person? When we get to that as a country, I'm not sure. I believe you are 100% correct that the media does have a heavy involvement in that. There's
Well,
this.
it probably doesn't help that you've got two distinctive different So people should be. It doesn't matter if
Yeah,
you watch Fox News or and NSB. I can't think of the. I think
MSNBC. I know what you're
yeah.
talking about. Yeah,
So one is Republican, and it's pretty obvious, and obviously one Democrat. Whereas
yeah,
the news is, I don't think it is anymore. But as in, it's supposed to be impartial and give you all the
it is.
give you fact, and then you make a decision on based on, okay, I don't agree with that, and I do da 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 da. But it's almost, and it probably doesn't matter what country it is, because I think most of the networks are doing it now because they're
Yeah,
owned by one entity, so they
yeah,
probably all have an identity. So if I just pump out this, the people that are going to follow the status quo almost have the blinkers on, so to
mhm,
speak. Some are going to conform, some are going to do as they're told. Obviously, with the c word, people are starting to wake up as well. The science behind it is not as concrete. Obviously, you've got an
mhm,
extreme with that as well, of some coming out as well. You need to do it for this reason, for you saving your grandmother. Obviously, you're going to do that if you're very, very, very close to them as a family member, because like, well, yeah, I need to do it because it's the moral thing to do. Whereas if you look at the
yeah,
science of, I can't remember what I'd seen, it's like 5% efficacy, and you being a college professor, that is horrific. That
yeah,
you need, okay, to give some people some context of that, to have a perfect study, you need 95% to be it, to be, it's that's close. 99 would be better, but you can't get a pun. But 5% efficacy in something that's supposed to be preventative and to stop deaths. And I think it was an African one I'd seen, that they
mhm,
showcased the US versus Niger, and the mortality rate was, I think, 80% in the US being vaccinated.
mhm,
Okay, I could probably take that with a pinch of salt, because if you want to make it fit your what you want to be, I won't call it an agenda, but if you want to make something to be true, you're only going to show certain facts. You're not going to show everything, because it might show something but it kind of, for me, it went, well, okay, that doesn't make no sense, because shouldn't I, somewhere in Africa, if there's, I think it was less than 5% have been vaccinated, shouldn't their mortality rate be through the roof? So was it a ruse? Was it fictitious? We might know in the future. Obviously, a lot of people will be a lot to be accountable for if it wasn't true. To just to see, well, what can we get away with when it comes to absolute power? Never in my lifetime would I have seen 1984 come out of a book and be reality.
mhm.
Hopefully, it wasn't true, and just to kind of, just it was just a book. But hey, if Orwell was a smart person, if he knew that could actually come to come to reality, that, I can't remember what I'd read. It was that people wanted to come COVID amnesty. Like, well, if you've created something that wasn't real, just to see what how people have been almost become doormats, being suppressed because of social media, of media, to the point that you can almost coerce somebody to do whatever you want, because, oh, we've got all these facts, this is why you need to do it, and then all this thing, it's quite scary that we've become, as individuals, almost a collective, and we do as well, the will of anybody, almost like, I can't even think of the movie called, but as in the person looking under a microscope trying to burn ants. That is almost scary. That's It's good that you've got the likes of BLM, people that are woke, to kind of go, no, no, hang on a second, this is wrong on so many levels, that the people I think Piers Morgan have apologized, because push that narrative of, hey, people that aren't being vaccinated are being idiots. I didn't judge anybody. It's like, if you choose to be unvaccinated, that's your choice. If you're going to be vaccinated, each to their own, in terms of, if you feel so strongly, ethically, morally, maybe you can't have it because of health reasons. I'm not going to make you a scapegoat. Who am I to judge somebody when it comes to their own health? Okay, people probably can tell what I did, but I hope in the future my decision I chose to make doesn't affect my health. But that's one side of an argument. Or others, people kind of go, "Well, you're an idiot. Why did you choose to do that?" Or families being at each other's throat because they've been unvaccinated. You're thinking, well, what, you're supposed to be family members. You should care about each other and respect that person's decision. So it's, I think, Sean, we live in a very volatile world at present, as in it's a dumpster fire, probably putting it lightly, in terms of people are so easily, you just poke them a little bit and they go into full Hulk mode. Whereas I don't know whenever that has changed to kind of go, okay, let's we've done, have a nice discussion. We might have not agreed on certain points, but obviously people don't know that. But in terms of, it shouldn't result in that kind of behavior, in terms of you like turning on a light switch into, I go from nice, calm, relaxed James to I become almost like a Jekyll and Hyde person. I'm completely different, just because we don't agree on certain beliefs. It's quite scary that in my lifetime, how that has immensely changed to, it is interesting on the one hand, but obviously scary on the other hand, that you've only got to look at certain countries in the world that they could be on the brink of civil war, and it only takes a little match.
Absolutely. And I always say this relative to that. We social media in particular has given everybody a platform. Whether you agree, like you say, or not, to this person needing a platform, or whatever the case may be, whoever it is that you love or hate out there. But what it has done is given some people the power to say whatever they feel is on their mind, that they probably wouldn't say if they saw that person, face to face. I'm very much the type of person that I stand my ground on certain things that I believe in, but I'm like you in a sense. I I don't. I think it's a waste of energy and time to yell at you about something I don't agree with what you had to say, if that's not going to even change your mind anyway, right? Um, but and so for me, it's interesting that you know the power of communication and how it has shifted over time has led us to be, like you said again, a lot more angry, or at least that's what is showcased now because we see it. Um, and whether we can get to a point of um, having empathy and sympathy for someone who is dealing with an issue that you may not know about, or I should say that you may be not be privy to, but if they explain to you and say, "This is my real issue," you don't have to agree with me, but this is why I stand behind X, Y, and Z, and the other person can be, okay, I don't understand it, I don't get it, but I'm not going to try and harm you in any way, whether it's physical or mental. You know, that's what I believe. Anybody from any ethnicity, background, that's the place where we want to be. Speaking about kids killing each other over shoes, like you say, because they want to feel like they want to fit in and belong. I mean, I'm with you. I grew up in in my junior high school where Jordans were the thing to have, and my mom couldn't afford them. And if you couldn't wear them, you're in an unpopular group, right? Whereas today I see it as, man, I don't know. I can buy me a pair of Skechers and I'm cool. But you know, all of those things have to do with, like you say, where the powers stand, who's controlling that one, right? And how we try to combat that as a society. There is this concept in media, or media scholars study. They say it's the agenda setting theory that says that the media doesn't tell you what to think, but they do tell you what to think about, right? And so, yeah, we really have to pay attention to the fact that, yeah, many media outlets have a particular slant towards whatever political party that they belong to. Now, besides all of that, we take it again into like your career as an athlete and all the athletes that we see now. The goal is for athletes to become more educated on their causes and put together the proper strategies so where they can see tangible results, to where they don't have to constantly go back and try to fight the media on something that they said and all of this stuff like that. But that's where we stand. And so how can we get to that point? It remains to be seen, because I believe at the end of the day that athletes who fight for causes, they're going to make mistakes. It's not going to be a perfect transition, and we have to be patient. But with the proper use of media and the proper use of talking to grassroots organizations, nonprofits, leaders who are fighting for certain causes, we can see some change that will occur outside of this partisanship stuff that we see. When that will happen, it'll take some time, like I always say.
Do you think then, Shaun, what society lacks is true leadership? Because obviously sports knows exactly what that is, because see more from American football perspective of,
Yeah.
if people don't make a certain grade or a standard, this person we want gone. So there's almost like this. I've seen it myself that people would kind of judge the competitiveness that athletes has is like demonize it. Oh, this is bad. Like no. What you have a problem as society is comparison. That's what should be the problem as well. Why do you go on to Instagram to look at, we'll say, fitness influencers, and look at that as like that's the benchmark for what is, so to speak, the ideal physique? It's not, because they're not portraying their true self for the majority, and I think people are obviously aware of that nowadays because it's been talked about so much. So do you think, and I think one person, you might not agree with me this, but obviously Deion Sanders, he was a very flamboyant character as an athlete. And you've probably seen the one he said of, "Don't mistake my arrogance, my confidence for your insecurities." I love that. I share that with a client, and they went, "He's right," because at the end of the day, it's somebody else's insecurities that they perceive somebody's high level of confidence as. Well, I would say he's quite arrogant as well, but there's a fine line from my perspective of what is confidence and what is arrogance, because it's very subjective.
Yeah.
So for you, as being an alumnus of a HBCU university, What do you think he has given back? Because obviously he's no longer a head coach of one of those programs. What do you
Right.
think he's given back to a predominantly black institution by obviously going to Jackson State and obviously now moving on to the University of Colorado?
You know, like you say, Coach Prime, as they call him, right? Deion, I grew up watching him playing with Atlanta, San Francisco, Dallas Cowboys. You know, like you say, he's always been that character. Coming out of Florida State, I'm sure probably even in high school, he had a flair for the flamboyant, right? Um, I think kind of taking into what you were saying, the line between confidence and arrogance, I think simply is um, you can be as flamboyant as you want to be, and you're in your own space doing that. I think that's confidence. But if you're saying, okay, I'm doing all of that, and then I'm saying I'm constantly pointing at you, saying that I'm better than you, then that's where that arrogance lies. But I believe a lot of people who are confident people get mistaken for arrogance because again, it goes into that insecurity that Dean was talking about. You know, I'm being me, and being me is not telling you that you're bad. I'm just being me. And so I think then people take that on as okay, look at him. He's calling himself prime, he's this and he's that, he's seeking attention, he thinks he's better than somebody. You know, that's where that language comes from. But here's the thing that I will say about Deion and his move into Colorado. The issue is that, yes, there are talented players at HBCUs, okay? The issue is that they're not as funded as your Power Five, your FCS, even in some cases, some Division II schools that are predominantly white. And so I think initially Deion wanted to be the head coach at Florida State, but he was also in that latter area where you needed to prove yourself for a few years before you come to a school of that magnitude. And so when he went to Jackson State, which is, known, well, for some people, it's known for producing Walter Payton, Jerry Rice. It has its name, but of course it doesn't have a name like Nick Saban has at Alabama. But in the 3 years that he was there, and again, some people may or may not agree with me, he was able to put the school on the map. I mean, to have college game day, arguably the biggest pregame show in college sports, come to Jackson State, you know, is a help when it comes to wanting to get money from boosters, companies that are trying to build up your facilities. I think I put up a post about a few months ago, and I said, well, whether Deion is here or not, if you have another prominent black athlete who becomes a coach in the HBCU, you're still going to see maybe 10 years before you see substantial progress across the board, across many HBCUs that compete, because they have to build up from the lack that they have financially compared to these other institutions like Alabama, to where if you're a top recruit, you're most likely guaranteed at least no later than a second round pick in the NFL draft. And so I think what he did to not only build up himself, the athletes, and the coaches in a 3 year span, it was a great thing. And there was no secret that he wanted to coach at a Power Five school even before he came. The only issue that I would have to say was the problem with him leaving was the fact that many people believe that he came to change the face of HBCUs and that he was going to stay for the long haul. To do that, now I can't knock that argument, but I also can't knock the fact that he built something that could continue to go if you put the right people in place. Um, And then we also argue about the fact that, okay, we don't see enough Black coaches in Power Five sports. So is it going to be the argument that, he sold out the HBCUs to go to a supposed better situation? Or are we going to take the fact that he did a lot of good despite what he was paid, despite the rankings of that school at the time, to where it now won the SWAC championship, and he takes that same credentials, take those same powers, and go and try to build another program, but it just happens to be a white school. I don't think we could knock that move. The only thing is that I guess many people will feel that, okay, HBUs are set back now because he left. But honestly, before he came, there was not a lot of progress, at least financially, at least the monies that were brought into the institution prior to him coming. And so I'm a proud HBCU graduate. I love my university. My university, the University of Arkansas Pine Bluff, has won a championship within the last decade. And they have a lot of latitude, a lot of ways to be able to grow. But I don't think we could solely place the blame on Deion that, okay, we can't progress anymore. He has a family too. So, I mean, I support him for pursuing what it is that he wanted to do. And we should celebrate what he has done to put HBCUs on the map even more.
Do you believe because he has that presence about him? I mean, more from a social media perspective, that is because I looked, because we were talking about before we come on to record. Mm-hmm. If you just scroll through, I probably wouldn't be able to do all the comments. Could be probably take forever to do it.
Yeah.
But the amount of hate towards obviously him making a decision, what was obviously he wants you can't fault somebody wanting to have a bigger challenge, and obviously the financial implications of Colorado wanting him to go there probably would have been paid handsomely to do it, because they want to
$5 million a year.
They want to be relevant in the division, and they want to be relevant in the conversation for time to go. Because so for me, from probably being in the trenches of sport, that's probably a stepping stone for him to something else. Mm-hmm. So he'll be okay. I've been successful at Jackson State. Colorado is the next ladder on that step to ultimately, who knows? Could be Florida State. It could be Clemson. It could be Alabama. Who knows? In terms of if they want to have almost that primetime aspect of what he brings to every aspect of social media. Obviously, there's a buzz about it. I can't remember how much their social media went up in the space. I know that they sold more merchandise than they have done in, so he brings an immense amount of, I'll call it swag, because that's what he calls it, people want to show their colors as, hey, I like where this is going. We don't know where it could go. Pretty much recruits are going to change their decision based on that decision alone, in terms of, okay, I've committed to this program, I'm going to decommit. I'm going to go somewhere. I'm going to go somewhere else. It might be the University of Colorado. It could be somewhere else, but it almost changes, like as he mentioned when he first went to the HBCU, was to change the landscape. He's by obviously doing that quite easily by changing, because if people are jumping into the transfer portal just on one coaching decision change, if that's, I think it's a good thing, because if you got just the same schools fighting out for a national championship every single year, people are going to eventually tune off, because it's like, it's the same schools every single year. What's the point in terms of competing? Obviously, the kids might become disillusioned to it as well. What's the point in even? I don't think they will probably ever get to this extent. But what's the point in suiting up because we've got no chance because of the automatic biased to
Mhm.
some of these programs because they happen to be Power Five or they have a historical bias of winning things,
Yeah.
which FSU was very good when I was growing up. Not very good at the moment, but obviously that would
Yeah.
change. University of University of Miami is probably a program of ultimately utilizing inner city kids, black predominantly black kids, to bring
Yeah.
it because that I think that school was predominantly I think 90% black, not black, sorry, 90% white, Coral Gables. The football program put it on the map.
Right.
So to almost single out an individual is I think is a little bit harsh in terms of give him credit where he's delivered success of I think what he stands for probably more from his religious background that he's been brought
Mhm.
up on in terms of I want kids to be prepared for the real world because some might make it to the NFL. Some people more than likely will have a normal career like everybody else, and they
Yeah.
need to have respect, discipline. The clothing surprised me in terms of not being wearing baggy clothes. And I thought that went out in when I finished school in the early teens. But he's got a point that even when I dressed like that as a teenager, my dad said, "No, you're not dressing like that in certain
Yeah.
circumstances because you're going to be judged. You're not a hoodlum. You're not a gangbanger. You don't need to dress with your pants sagging around your ass and wearing things. So I think as an adult now, I think it's a true representation of leadership in terms of let's give kids a fighting chance to be able to, even if they don't go to a Ivy League school, they're going to have an opportunity to be looked at based on their character, what they've brought to it. And obviously business and sport is almost saying tangibles are the same as, hey, we like what's sport, let's bring it into business. But
Yeah.
if you've maybe not gone to an Ivy League school or say an Oxford or Cambridge in this country, there's going to be certain limitations that you've got because you don't know the right people to
Mhm.
be in those certain inner circles to be able to doors or magic probably open quite instantly for those individuals because there's almost like a tradition of family. They know all people know each other. Thus,
The whole legacy thing.
you've
Yeah.
got you've got a I won't say an easier footing, but things come a lot easier because you already
Yeah.
know the right people.
Right.
So for him to kind of showcase that at Jackson State and now obviously Colorado, they'll have some standards of how people are. I don't know. I've only been to the airport in Denver, so I wouldn't know. But in terms of
Yeah.
they would have certain standards of what they would respect in that part of the US that he would maybe bring on board of and I think he's gone into local businesses of I've done this and their service is outstanding. I'm not surprised. But
Yeah.
in terms of that's a social media, you are gonna over deliver as a business because
Sure.
of the reach that he's got from a audience. Some people might be local. Some people might go, "Oh, Deion Sanders has repped that business. Let me go and try it out for myself. Oh, it's as good as he said."
Right.
But that, in an instant, is because of one individual.
Yeah.
Of I think even his son went to that institution. Doesn't have to, but he wanted to play for his dad.
Yeah.
Not
And
that.
and I think it's a few more players that are going to go with him. And actually, I need to make a slight correction. Walter Payton went to Jackson State, but Jerry Rice went to Mississippi Valley State University. And so, we still had a lot of great athletes come out of these institutions. But yeah, prime sales, right? He has had that sort of reputation for the longest. And you can't knock, again, just in those 3 years, having this past undefeated season, playing in the Celebration Bowl, and one of the assistants who was coaching with him is now the head coach, of the team. And you can't knock what he said he tried to do. He wanted to be there for his family. He wanted to be there for his assistant coaches, many of them who don't have his legacy in the NFL, don't have his wealth, and the reduction of salary that he took to help support them and help support facilities at Jackson State. Again, you can't knock those things. And, any institution that he would have gone to would have benefited from what he is doing. And, the both fortunate and unfortunate thing, if you look at it on either side of the argument, is that now Colorado has a lot more resources for him to be able to get paid, a lot more exposure for the athletes that are going to follow him. And I think that that's the argument on the other side, that people felt that, okay, with all the exposure that you brought to these players that you care about, that they're no longer going to get that exposure. But I would caution any sports media outlet to not take away the coverage of these teams, lest you will continuously be accused of not providing the exposure and platform for these players to possibly get drafted as well. That is where we stand with that situation. But again, now here's going to be the problem. Let's say in the next 2-3 years, Colorado has a losing record. Then all of the vitriol is going to, you should have never left HBCU. You wasn't a really good coach anyway. All this stuff, it all speaks to what he said in his meeting when he announced that he was going to Colorado. He was telling the players that, in this game, it's about winning and losing. You get outed. If you lose, they praise you when you win. And let's imagine that they didn't win at Jackson State in his 3-year tenure. They probably would have let him go anyway. And then we wouldn't even be talking about this. And so again, I value HBCUs and I love them, and I think they're very valuable to our society. But I don't think we should give up now on the fact that they're going to continue to get exposure just because Deion left. Now he's a big name, don't get me wrong, but there's still value in where HBCUs can go. And I also, on the other end, applaud Deion for what he's done and what he's about to do.
Yes, please. I think you and I could probably talk for ages.
Yeah, for sure.
So for this episode, and I'd love to have you on again in the future. Okay. If you had to summarize what we've spoken about today into one sentence for people to take away, what would that be?
Athletes are intelligent. Athletes are smart. Athletes are more than entertainers. They are business leaders, and they are fighting for social causes.
So, Shaun, thanks again for coming on the Mindset Athlete podcast.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
It's been my absolute pleasure.